Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Have You Thought of a Career in Medical Research? This afternoon session is part of the IF Oxford Science and Ideas Festival, but it's part of an ongoing series of talks hosted by NDORMS and NDS. So if you like this talk this afternoon, then please come along to our next talk, which will be on the 3rd of November. This year, the IF Oxford Festival is 30 years old. It's had various forms over the last 30 years, but it's celebrating its 30th anniversary. And IF Oxford events are continuing until the 26th of October, which by my reckoning is next Tuesday. So the way today is going to work, we'll hear from our three researchers shortly, who will be telling us a little bit about their career now and how they got to what they're doing. If at any time you would like to ask a question, please just type it into the Q&A box. So without further ado, we're going to move to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Scott Small, and he's going to tell us a bit about what he's up to now and how he got to what he's doing. Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie, and thank you for everyone for attending today. Just wanted to go through basically what I do now, how I got here and how my career kind of shifted to where I do medical research on a regular basis. My background is in engineering. I'm not a physician, a clinician, but have really always had sort of an inkling and a desire to work in the medical field. So right now, I'm a fourth-year PhD researcher at the Nuffield Department of Orthopedics, and came here specifically because I wanted to work with patients, and I wanted to do research that was hands-on in a clinic and doing things to really improve patient care on the ground in the hospital. And so I'll explain a little bit about what I do in a minute, but I wanted to step back and really kind of start from where you probably are right now, thinking about what you enjoy, what things you like and don't like, and just how you kind of picture yourself evolving in your career as you go along. And so when I was beginning kind of my university career, I always enjoyed math. I always enjoyed science. And that was something that really had people, encouraging me to look at engineering. I think that's the classic, if you're good at math, you like science, you like these sorts of things, go in and check out engineering. And so that's what I did. I really, I went into university and studied mechanical engineering. So mechanical engineering is really the study of things like engines and gears and mechanical systems and how they work and how they integrate together and how you can use those to build bigger systems. So I did really enjoy that. But very early on, I realized that that this was something that I enjoyed, but I also wanted to see how I could apply this into kind of a medical area, medical application. And so what I did, I migrated a little bit from mechanical engineering through the course of my studies into what's called biomedical engineering. And so biomedical engineering is exactly that. It's any discipline of engineering. You can think of kind of electronics or software, mechanical things like that, and specifically in the application of medical sciences. So some of the things that biomedical engineers do, creating assistive devices, things like prosthetics, wheelchairs, anything sort of like that. That's an application of engineering for a clinical use. Diagnostic equipment. When you go into the hospital and you see an MRI or an X-ray machine, if you have a friend who wears a wearable blood sugar monitor because they're diabetic, those are all things that are diagnostic equipment that, again, had to have a process and a design and an intentional development for the clinical aspect. And so I was interested in that. Software engineering is another aspect. We're looking at artificial intelligence, medical data management, things like that. And then what really drew me were things like implantable devices. So anything that, I think we've got a couple surgeons coming up next, anything that the surgeon is using, the instrumentation in the surgery, things like sutures, stents, things they're putting into the body, pacemakers, joint replacements, all those things are, again, things that have to be developed, things that have to be analyzed for patients to be able to use them and for doctors to be able to use them and have confidence that they're going to be used to help patients. And so that's where I spent the early part of my career, is working alongside orthopedic surgeons, kind of in a biomedical engineering capacity, trying to understand joint implants specifically, so joint replacement implants, trying to understand those, seeing how the development of those implants changes and affects the patient's experience, changes and affects what the doctor is doing in surgery. And so I spent 10 years in the lab, basically working with doctors, working with implant manufacturers, looking at new designs, looking at new surgical techniques, and seeing how those all affected bone loading effectively. So the short of it is, we took implants, we stuck them in bone models, or we stuck them in donated tissue from people who have donated bodies to science, things like that, and really looked at how we can change devices and improve devices to make the interactions with bones and native tissues better. And so that's something that I really enjoyed, and spent 10 years doing that. And eventually came to a point where, while I really enjoyed that, I wanted to also get involved in what the patients were doing, and really see the application of this technology in the patient's life. You know, how is it affecting them after a surgical intervention? Is their life improving after that? And so that's what took me from, exclusively biomedical engineering to migrate into what I would really call more of kind of a health data science and a medical science degree. I came to Oxford to pursue that. And what I do now really is I've held on to kind of my love of technology and my application of technology in the clinical field, but I use that now to track patients and to monitor how well they're doing after an implant. So specifically the work that I do, we take things very similar to Fitbits, so activity sensors, and we give those to patients before their surgery, and we give those to patients after their surgery. And what we do with that data, we really try and understand how a joint replacement surgery, so what patients are coming into the hospital, their knees are stiff, they're painful, they're not able to kind of get up and move around because they have this pain or they have this stiffness in their joint. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to use technology, these sensors, to monitor the patient's progression as they recover. In the first 2, 3, 4 months after surgery, we're trying to develop systems that we can make sure that patients are getting up, they're moving more actively, they're able to do the things that they wanted to do, and then trying to predict and identify when patients are not performing as well or not recovering as well as we think they should or they might be able to. And so some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, and some of the skill sets that I've brought along and kind of learned things like just learning how to use sensors, how to configure sensors, use that data. When you've got a bunch of raw data, I just did a quick off the cuff calculation, and for every patient that we have, we get about 6 to 9 million data points on these patients. So how do we use that and process that information to make some sort of decision or analysis about that patient? Some other things we use machine learning, artificial intelligence, to be able to see what sort of activities people are doing based off of just how their wrist is moving. We try and identify how much more often they're walking than they were previously, that sort of thing. And then things like computer science, data science, trying to make sense of this data, trying to associate data with outcomes and understand kind of relationships between physical activity and how old the patient is, what other medical issues they have, sex, weight, all sorts of things, trying to just bring that data together and get a better understanding of how that works and how that gives us a picture of the patient. So that's kind of my career progression. And I just wanted to give you a bit of advice just from what I've learned and what I've done. First, a bit of advice, just looking back on my own career, is just to keep moving, keep pursuing your interests. Don't assume that something is exactly the way that one person that that does this job, they do this thing. Don't assume that that's what everyone does. Don't assume because you've started on this path or because someone has told you, hey, you're good at X, so you should do Y. Don't assume that that is necessarily what you have to do or what you will be doing, but really just don't be afraid to kind of naturally pursue your interests, because they may lead, and I think you'll talk to a lot of people, they may lead kind of a not a straight path, but kind of a curvy path, but that kind of narrows you in to something that you would really enjoy, that matches, some of your skill sets, some of the things that you're interested in continuing to learn and how you want to apply that. And then the last bit of advice I would give as someone interested in medical research is talk to a lot of people. Again, figure out, attend things like this. I think it's great that you're here. Attend things like this. Get perspectives from people doing all sorts of different jobs within the field that you're interested in, and shadow people if it's a day or if it's a week or if even it's just a couple hours that they can bring you along and kind of just watch what people do. I think that's a huge benefit to understanding how you want to pursue your degree and how you want to pursue your career. So those are a couple of my experiences. That's how I've gotten to where I am, and would love to answer any questions about what you have.
Okay, so it doesn't look like we've got any specific questions for you yet, Scott, but I was interested to know. So you said that you realised quite early on that you'd be interested in the more kind of medical side of things. Mm-hmm. Did you do straight mechanical engineering at university and then have to do further training after you'd finished that degree, or was that something you were able to take options in your final year, or do projects?
That's a great question. So I went to university in the States, so it may be a little bit different. But what I did, my primary course of study was mechanical engineering, and about halfway through, realized I was really interested in kind of the medical application of this. So I was able to pick up a couple of courses in biomedical engineering in my first degree. Went on to get a master's degree in biomedical engineering. And then as I kind of followed that career path, that's when I decided, okay, I really want more of a medical sciences, hands-on in the clinic sort of career. And then came back and pursued this third degree in sort of a medical sciences role. So as you go along, very much not a traditional student. I was out of university for 10, 12 years before I came back again. And so, I think there's no one set rigid platform and pathway that works for everybody and is meant for everybody.
Okay, thank you. So don't forget, if you've got any questions for Scott or any of our speakers, if you just type the questions in the Q&A box. But we're going to move to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is Katie Hurst. Katie is a surgeon, but she's also a researcher as well. So Katie, would you like to go ahead and tell us a bit more about your life and your career?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really excited actually for this opportunity to share my journey with you, because I'm very passionate, very excited about all the things that I do in my job. And I have to agree with Scott, actually. I'm going to start with a nugget, which is that I totally agree, is that there isn't one pathway. So it's quite nice to see the three of us that are on here today with different pathways, and we're going to explain to you how we got there. But there isn't a right one or a wrong one. And I think that's how you grow as a person. You certainly take bits from different parts of your life that make you into the professional person you want to be at the end. So hopefully the three of us today can give you some ideas as you go along. So I actually didn't know at school that I wanted to be a doctor. I wasn't born ready to, I didn't have any medical family. It wasn't something that I thought I definitely wanted to do, but I was always very inquisitive about it. The main thing was I loved science. I loved biology. I loved the human body. And I actually went to university to do a BSc first before I made that decision. And it was during that BSc that I grew as a person, and I realised how much I loved anatomy. Anatomy was, what I really enjoyed. I couldn't wait for the classes each week, and it was just excited me to learn more about the human body. And that was the main trigger, I think, that thought, hang on a minute, I love people, I love helping, I love anatomy, and I could really see myself as being a physician that could care and that could make a difference. So I went to medical school. And I absolutely loved every moment. I thought it was every placement was exciting. I didn't really know what to do. I thought I wanted to do surgery, but then went on to medical jobs, and I really enjoyed those. But I think towards the end of my degree, I realised that being in an operating theatre, really trying to cure people, which is something that surgery does, was my niche, was where I kind of fitted in the puzzle. And what I find about surgery is that you really do cure people. So somebody comes in with like a cancer, it's a huge life-changing event for a patient, but you follow them through the whole journey. So you see them and have to break the news to them, but then you follow them through this very courageous journey, and a lot of the time cure them, and they go back to a normal life with their families, and it's just a very rewarding job. I've been as part of your training, you do go into different areas. So I've had ups and downs throughout my career of deciding, do I want to do this type of surgery or this type? But I think once I realised exactly what I wanted to do and found my niche, then I found my fit, and that was good. But I think one of the things I'd like to talk to you about, so that I can explain the next part of my career once I became a doctor, is to talk to you a little bit about what the pathway is in the UK. So once you've done your 5 or your 4 year, depending if you're a postgraduate, or even a 6 year if you want to do a BSc as an extra degree at the same time, you finish medical school. So that's a 4, 5 or 6 year degree. When you come through out of that, you have 2 years as a junior doctor, a further 2 years specialising in either surgery or medicine or GP, acute care. And then once you've done those kind of 4 years post-university, you then go on to your specialist training in your particular area. And I was really fortunate that I realised in medical school that not only did I want to help people be a doctor or end up being a surgeon, I also felt that you can make even more of a difference if you understand how to make things better, how to make either the service better. That's how it started for me, was how can I improve the NHS? How can I improve the service? How can I make my patients get more out of their appointment or more out of an investigation? And that started to trigger my mind more and more into thinking, maybe research is where I need to be as well. I think that's the bit that's missing from my puzzle. I come in every day and I'm able to do the bits I learned in medical school, but how do I make this better? And I was able to do some preliminary work in a lab, see what they do, talk to people exactly like you're doing today, talk to people that do the job, and realise that I wanted to pursue that avenue. And so I started as an academic pretty much from the word go. So those first 2 years, which you call the foundation years, I mixed in research with those years, but more of a taster, more of a kind of put your foot in the water, see how things go. I really enjoyed juggling both sides, clinical and research. And so I pursued that into that next block, the next 2 years, where I not only started to do surgery as a career, but I also continued into surgical research. At the end of that point, I was able to apply for a further degree called a PhD. And so I applied for funding for that to continue the work that I'd been doing for the last 4 years. And the only difference in this part is that it's very difficult to do both things alongside each other when you're doing a full another degree. So prior to that, it was a bit of a juggling act. At that time, I decided to stop my clinical work and pursue research to get a PhD. That is just in the process of being completed, but I've come back into clinical training now, and I'm now doing a little bit of both again, which makes me very happy. My research itself, because I started research when I first left medical school, is looking at arteries or our blood vessels in the body, and particularly the blood vessels that go to the brain, which can cause strokes, and other blood vessels which go to the legs, which can lead to the tissue in the legs dying if they don't have enough blood supply, and ultimately can lead to amputations. And I was quite fascinated when I started as a foundation doctor as to why some people had one disease and some people had the other, yet we learn that the process behind both the diseases are due to fat buildup in the arteries, which some of you may be aware of from biology, and it's the same thing that causes heart attacks. And we kind of think, hang on, if you get fat in the arteries, then maybe all the arteries should be blocked up. And I started to see that some people had one and some people had another. And so I wanted to find out why. And that's what led me through into taking time out to do some research. As you can probably tell, I love everything about my job. It's fantastic. It's really exciting. I get to do bits of both worlds, and I absolutely love being a surgeon and making a difference. I think it's important to understand, if you do go down that pathway, then you have to be fairly organised to be able to do kind of 2 jobs at once. And sometimes that can be a little bit challenging. But at the same time, it's completely doable. Otherwise, you wouldn't have 2 of the 3 panel here doing this as a career. So it's just that you have to have an interest in it, and most people will make time for their interests. And so if you're passionate about not only being a doctor but also improving the future, then bringing research into your career is definitely the way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. We have had one question, which is about that sort of juggling time. So someone's asked, how do you manage your time with being a surgeon and doing research? I mean, how do you have a social life?
I definitely can tell you I do have a social life, very much so, and I'm married and have lots of friends, and so it doesn't mean that you have to give up everything, so that's certainly not the case. I think it's about prioritising, definitely, and also that most research and clinical are aligned, so it's not as if you're doing one thing that's completely different to another. So for example, my clinical work actually helps with my research because I'm able to find the patients that I want to include in the studies, and then the work that I'm doing in research feeds back into my clinical work because I'm making the right decisions for patients, thinking about the management more effectively, and so they definitely come hand in hand. There are times though when one has to be more focused than the other, and I think that's why over the trajectory of time I've spent more time sometimes being a surgeon and learning to be a surgeon, and then that's when I took a time out to do my PhD to just focus on the research side of things. So you definitely can't do both things at the most exceptional level all the time. That isn't possible. But what you can do is prioritize certain bits of each part at each time. And I've definitely taken time where I've said 6 months, hang on, research will still be there. I'm going to focus on learning my job, learning to be a good surgeon, learning to operate, and then I'll come back to doing a bit of 60-40 in a few months' time. And you'll realise as a person which bit needs a bit of work at which time in your life.
Thank you, Katie. So now we're going to move to our final speaker, Rachel Crow, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about what she's doing, where she got to where she is, and then after she's spoken, we'll get a chance to talk to all of our speakers and ask them questions. So, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here today. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. I've really enjoyed hearing about Scott and Katie's work and how they got there. So hopefully, what I have to say will be helpful as well. So I guess what I'll do is just talk a bit about my job at the moment, some of the research that I'm doing, and then just like Scott and Katie, talk a bit about how I got here. So I'm a plastic surgery registrar doing some research at the moment. And what that means, as Katie says, is that I'm partway through my surgical training, but I've got a little bit of a way to go before I become a consultant. And I've got some dedicated research time so that I can focus on that aspect of my work. And what I hope is to start my PhD next year. So hopefully in a couple of years' time, I'll be in Scott and Katie's shoes. So when I think about my career and how I got here, I think a lot of my sort of career choices have been really characterized by a lot of indecision. I've always had a really difficult time deciding what it is I want to commit to, because I usually enjoy most things. And I remember when I was at school, the things I loved the most were art, music, English literature, languages, absolutely loved all of those. And actually my school, when I was there, thought I should become a lawyer, which is sort of, you know, if you were sort of smart and you were interested in stuff and you were into English, is what everyone, you know, you should do. And actually, I was a really sort of chance sort of thing, because it seems really unlikely now, but at the time I was really into skateboarding, and I actually went skateboarding. I was really not very good at it and fell over and had this really bad cut through my knee. So I ended up having to go to A&E to go and get it stitched up. And when I was there, I just was amazed by it. You know, there's such like this energy. I mean, I think most people don't enjoy being in A&E, but there was so much energy and so much buzz around me that I felt really inspired by it. And so when I sort of got home after everything had been sorted, I had a real think about it, and then at pretty much the last minute changed my A-level choices from doing English and history and art to doing, you know, maths and biology. And so that sort of accident really changed the course of my life. And it's hard to know, you know, perhaps I would have been really happy as a lawyer too. So I went to medical school. I did 6 years of medical school. What happens at medical school is that your course is 5 years long. You do a bit of learning about science, you do a bit of learning about how to look after patients. And then if you want to, most universities will give you the opportunity to do an extra year where you think about a science, or you sort of have this extra degree that comes with being a doctor. So you get your doctor degree, but then you also get this other extra one. So I spent a year doing neuroscience, which is really interesting. So I learned a lot about, we had a special module about how flies move around in the world and how they interact with different stimuli around them. So I had a really good time doing that. It was actually probably my most relaxed year of all of the 6 years of university. And then sort of, I guess that was really my first experience with doing science or learning about science in a sort of research sense rather than a medical sense. And I did really enjoy it. So when I finished medical school, I knew that I wanted to have some sort of research in my career, as well as doing medicine. And I think, you know, for me, it was that same thing where I just couldn't bear to give something up. I just wanted to have both things. I wanted to be a doctor, but I also wanted to do some research. So when I became a foundation doctor, which, as Katie says, is the first 2 years after you finish medical school, I had a bit of research time then. And so what that is that you do your rotations as a junior doctor, and you do your A&E job, and you do your general practice job and whatever else. But you also get some dedicated time to pick a research project and try and see it through. So what I did then was this sort of big data project. So we had like this massive database of these patients. I was learning about stats, and I was learning a little bit about programming to be able to draw out you know, different things that we can find out about those patients from that database. And so I found I really enjoyed that. I liked doing, well, I sort of knew from school, I liked doing maths, I liked doing statistics. So that was something that really stuck with me. After I did that, I went to do my surgical training. I really liked doing practical things when I was at school. I loved doing art. And then when I was doing my rotations, I found that I really enjoyed the sort of, again, I guess that sort of buzz of surgery. So I went on to do what's called core surgical training, which is where you go ahead and you do lots of different rotations and stuff. And I spent a year doing plastic surgery in that. And again, I think, you know, when I think about plastic surgery, it's something that I sort of enjoy because it's so broad. I think a lot of people, when I sort of meet them, you know, at like social things, and I talk about being a plastic surgeon, they sort of assume that, you know, it's all about aesthetics, you know, like doing breast implants, or you're doing a nose, like a rhinoplasty, which obviously is part of the job, but we do loads of different stuff. So hand surgery, we do burns, cleft lip and palate for babies, you know, looking after people with skin cancer. And there's a lot of working with a lot of different types of doctor in hospitals, which I always really enjoyed. And so when I finished my 2 years of doing that basic surgical training, I went on to do plastic surgery, which is what I've been doing for the last three years. And I was learning a lot about the basics of how you do that, and trying to juggle doing research on the side, which can be really challenging, especially if you're trying to sort of manage your life and your social life and your hobbies and doing sports and exercising as well. So I felt really relieved to sort of get some research time in something called an academic clinical fellowship, to be able to dedicate myself to looking at research again. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. The group that I'm with, we're sort of interested in how artificial intelligence can be used to help us to make diagnoses in hand surgery. So in specific, looking at how we can use AI to diagnose different types of hand fractures, which can sometimes be really difficult to see on X-rays. So that's what we're doing at the moment. It's something that I've always been really interested in because I've always loved doing, well, since I was a foundation doctor and learning how to do programming stats, it's something I've always enjoyed doing. And it sort of helps me to, I suppose, have a sort of extra skill set that I probably wouldn't have picked up if I hadn't done that. So that's basically it. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them. Yeah, that's it basically.
Thank you, Rachel. We have had a question, but I think I'm going to leave that one until we sort of start asking everybody. I'm just intrigued by the artificial intelligence side of things. Is that something that you do yourself? Do you work with a team of people who are programmers? What kind of skills are the people who work in your team on artificial intelligence? Because I know Scott was mentioning that he's using that for his project as well.
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a learning curve. I've been learning some of it myself. So learning a little bit more about programming and how, how you should design artificial intelligence studies. But I definitely need a lot of help because it's still very new to me. So I work with a professor of computer science in Oxford and some of her team who are helping me to learn about it and who sort of take the lead with it. So I suppose, that's the other really nice thing is that, you find that you meet a lot of people that you might not meet otherwise, and work with a lot of different people with different viewpoints to your own. Because I think, one of the dangers is that you sort of end up working and then you only really meet people who are like yourself or who have your sort of background or your views on things. So it's been really exciting to meet people who are doing something totally different.
Thank you. So I'm just going to throw the floor open to all of you now. We did have a question, which I guess is probably going to be most appropriate for either Rachel or Catherine. So we'll kick off with Katie, which is someone said, do you learn about how plants can be cured in medical schools?
Not really. Some of the mechanisms, some of the biology is mildly similar in plants, but it's mainly medical schools mainly to do with human anatomy and biology.
I think they were interested in, I guess, plants as a source of as a treatment. So I don't know if you covered anything specifically about that or about deriving drugs from plants.
We certainly do have a look at different, there's definitely discussions at medical school throughout the years on different treatments and how they can be effective, but not specifically. I think it's something that medication itself, of how we treat things, is looked at through research, and if it proves to be effective, then we use it in clinical practice, and if it isn't, then obviously we don't. But we certainly discuss about other treatments that are possible. Okay,
Rachel, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I guess in medical school, we did spend some time obviously learning about pharmacology and about drugs, and part of that is learning about drugs that are derived from plants, so things like aspirin, for example. So that is certainly part of my medical school curriculum. I wouldn't say it was a particular focus. It's probably in there, but not one of the things that you would sort of remember lots about years later.
Okay, I think I've got a fairly general question for all of you. I was just wondering if each of you could tell me the favourite thing about your job and maybe your least favourite thing about your job, shall we say. Should we start with Scott? Scott?
Oh, yeah, give me the tough question here. So I think the favorite thing is, my favorite thing is, like I spoke about a little bit, is just the ability to integrate some of my interests in kind of this endpoint of clinical care. You can affect and help people in a lot of different ways through a lot of different careers. But I think my favorite part is just being able to kind of pull from different avenues to do some sort of aid in a way that I find interesting. Least favorite thing, my goodness, I don't know. I might have to come back to that. That's hard. I think I do, what Rachel was talking about a little bit. I'm not a computer programmer by background. It's something that I've struggled to learn. It's something that I've grown to appreciate a little bit. I don't love it. But it's, as you go through and you develop skills and you learn some things that you were hesitant to learn or you were afraid of, and you find out, this is just something you need to learn or get an understanding of. Maybe least favorite thing, it turns out to be a good thing, but having to do some things that you're not comfortable with at first. But I think in general, that turns out okay.
Thank you, Scott. Katie, did you want to add anything?
Yes, certainly. So I think my favourite part of my job is I'm quite a people person, and I love being around people. And the one thing that I would say, probably on a more of a personal factor actually, that I love about my job is there are people around me all the time. And if somebody's not in a good mood, so maybe that's your boss, maybe that's a nurse, maybe that's a patient, maybe that's a relative, generally the other people aren't. So you'll always have a good day. There's just so many people that influence your day throughout it that I always come home with a smile. And that's, I think, probably the thing that I love about my job the most. One little bad negative impact earlier on in the day is totally washed out with the other people that you meet. I think the negative, as I say, it's hard actually, because I do love what I do and I do love juggling both things. The hardest thing for me over the last few years is that some of the research can't be done by anybody else other than you, in the fact that it can certainly be done by somebody else. You're not invincible, but you can't have 12 people all trying to put something in a Petri dish. It just doesn't work. So sometimes it can be a bit lonely, and you have to really see the end goal. If you're, depending what research you do, but the thing is this is such a broad field. There's so much that you can be doing. Some people have to get up in the middle of the night to look after their mice. Other people have to go collect specimens at 3 a.m. Other people have to, doing sleep studies like one of my colleagues is. So it isn't always like easy, and sometimes you're a bit isolated. And I think that's possibly one of the harder things that I find. I'm sure for some people out there, it's a dream. They enjoy a bit of time to themselves. But personally, I found that the hardest.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Rachel, would you like to tell us a bit about your favourite and least favourite things?
I guess I have different favourite and least favourite things based on the sort of clinical bit and the research bit. And I would say, well, my favourite bit about my clinical job is doing operations. It's just, I think that's probably common to many surgeons, but it's just so satisfying. It's just wonderful to do it. When you're learning how to do it, or when you have like mastered doing something and you just feel really good at it. And it's such a nice sort of feedback loop, because you sort of see someone and you sort of diagnose a problem, and then you do an operation, and then it's sort of sorted. And it's just such a nice, it's an amazing feeling. I think probably the worst thing about sort of clinical work for me is sort of dealing with, I think, being able to compartmentalize things. Especially sort of early on in my career, when you first start seeing people who are really sick, or people who are dying, or maybe it's something that you feel you could have done something better, or you've made a mistake. And that's something that, I really struggle to not carry home with me all the time. That's something that I'm still sort of coming to terms with, and sort of learning how to take on more responsibility and being able to separate that part of my life. I think probably for me, that's the sort of hardest part about my clinical work. Research-wise, I think the nicest thing about research for me is just being able to solve a problem. So maybe it's quite similar to surgery in that way, but you know, when I was doing, you know, a lot of stats and sort of learning how to you know, code stuff using statistical programs, a lot of the time the thing that was stopping me from progressing was just me not understanding how to do something. And it's actually just such a satisfying thing to be working on a problem for ages and then suddenly you just get it. And you know, that's a really nice feeling. And probably the hardest thing for me with research is I think maybe adjusting to in some ways sort of adjusting your expectations about how quickly things are going to happen, and how, you know, how research works and, you know, what happens at the end, because I think you're sort of used to, well, I was certainly used to as a surgeon to having a problem and then solving it in many ways, or and you know, when I was learning about science when I was at school and university, it was very much like, you know, this is the problem and this is the experiment, these are the experiments that sort of solved it. But actually the way that research works is not really like that. Lots of people have to tackle a problem from different angles before you sort of feel that there's some sort of consensus. So that's sort of a bit of a cognitive shift, I guess, in thinking about how you know, define your success in research. So probably that's the hardest thing, or the worst thing about it for me.
Thank you, Rachel. So we've had another question coming in, just saying, if you weren't doing biology, would you be able to do any medical research? I guess really that's, can you study things that aren't biology and go into medical research? Or, I mean, do you always have to learn some level of biology? I guess we might start with Scott here. So Scott, you obviously started as an engineer. Was there quite a lot you could do as an engineer in medical research without learning biology, or was that kind of a key part of it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think what you'll find is as you pursue your interests, the things that you need to learn, you pick up either in coursework or things like that. When I was in university, I took one tiny course in biology, never had anything like that, but then progressed into, I took a gross anatomy class and then took more physiology and things like that. So I know very little about genetics and those sorts of plant biology and things like that. But as my career progressed and as my academic career progressed, picked up more anatomy, picked up things more specific to what I was doing. So certainly, and I know engineers who went from completely engineering backgrounds and are surgeons and things like that now. So you certainly don't have to follow the path. There may be requirements that I can't speak to of, you know, medical requirements to get into medical school, things like that. But you can certainly kind of move around, and as you get interests in things and develop interests, you'll pick up some of the knowledge that you need to.
Thank you, Scott. Rachel, you said you work with a group of computer scientists. Presumably they haven't studied biology.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my current research group and everyone's backgrounds. And I think the sort of non-biology background people outnumber the number of people who've got a biology background. So it definitely doesn't seem, you know, I don't think at all it would be a barrier to you doing medical research, because there are so many ways that you can get involved in it. So in my sort of group of people, there's computer scientists, and that sort of ranges from people who are professor of computer science to people who are undergraduates in computer science. So they're all part of the group. So it's not like a barrier, like you have to get to a certain level before you're allowed to join. You know, it's quite open. You know, we've got someone who's got a sort of statistical background, who deals a lot in research methods. So you know, that person is, you know, real driver of the group. Someone else who's got a background in marketing, who then changed careers sort of halfway through. So you know, I think, you know, you not doing a biology, you know, degree or a biology job would not be a barrier to you doing medical research at all.
Thank you. Katie, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think actually most people have said, I think the answer is no, definitely. Yeah. I have lots of people in my group as well, and I have a I don't do things with computers particularly, but a very more like clinical based and cellular based research that I'm doing. And again, they don't all have biology backgrounds.
Thank you. I'm quite interested how all of you were affected by COVID. Did it make you busier? Did it make you less busy? Did it affect your research more than your clinical work, or vice versa? Katie?
Yeah, I probably don't have the greatest story about this really, because I was at the end of my PhD and in my final year, which is normally when everything comes together. You spend the first year normally in a higher research degree, making the plan, bringing it all together, getting all your ethics in line. A second year going for it and recruiting and things, or starting to get your results. And the final year is when you kind of analyze and bring it all together. And yeah, I was redeployed to intensive care pretty much straight away when the first wave hit for several months. All the labs shut down, so we weren't able to do anything. It was not from my side of things at all anyway. We weren't allowed to continue any scanning. We weren't allowed to recruit any patients. So obviously, for obvious reasons, we weren't allowed to increase any clinical exposure for any patients. So everything pretty much had to stop. So research stopped, clinical started, and I was on ITU for a few months.
Thank you, Katie. Scott, how about you?
Yeah, it went in waves. I think for a time, you know, I was developing methods like Katie was just saying, and I was working on recruiting patients to do these studies and to learn about how they're recovering, and now they're not having surgery because those are canceled. So for a time, that gave me an opportunity really to sit back, to think more about my analysis and plans and what I was going to do with the data once I had it. So that did allow me to refocus a little bit. And then, 4 or 5 months into the pandemic last year, surgeries, knee replacement surgeries, things like that started to pick up again. So I was able to get back into the hospital to do some clinical research as well. But certainly it gave me a step back where I had to kind of reassess what I was doing and how best to integrate that into a new pathway, certainly, and to, like Katie said, avoid as much clinical interaction as possible while still trying to get the job done.
Rachel, how about you?
So when COVID first became a thing in the first wave, I was actually working in Salisbury, doing Burns job. And we sort of burns and trauma. So actually, because those things sort of carried on, it was very much emergency work. I sort of stayed on doing that job throughout the first wave, but then had these sort of weird shifts where we would go and be part of the intubation team and and sort of have, I suppose, sort of smaller, more discrete jobs to do with looking after COVID patients, but largely the sort of job description actually stayed quite similar, surprisingly, throughout the first wave. The sort of second wave, when it happened, I was I'd moved to Oxford at that point, and then we were sort of helping out on ITU a bit and doing a couple of shifts there. But again, because it was mostly trauma work that we were doing in the sort of normal job that carried on. Research-wise, actually, it hasn't really I've been quite lucky. It hasn't really affected me too much because a lot of all of the work that I'm doing is computer-based. so nothing changed. And actually, in some ways, it made it easier because a lot of the meetings that I had with sort of patient representatives or the researchers moved to being online. So it actually saved me a bit of research budget and having to book rooms and that sort of thing. So weirdly enough, maybe it was quite helpful for that.
Thank you, Rachel. We've had a couple of questions come in now, so that's great. I'm going to sort of do them in reverse order, I think, actually. So how do you know which university would suit you best and what specific courses would help? I guess that would apply both for your first degree and any subsequent ones, but how did you go about deciding what, if you had to decide again now, maybe you didn't have much advice when you were at school. I know I didn't really. what's the best way of deciding which is the best university for you, I guess? Katie.
I think I've probably come with a bit of a medical view to this, because that's obviously the route that I took and how what experience I have. But I think it's the same for most courses of what you choose. Courses are run not too dissimilar to each other generally across the country. Most of them, the outcomes are the same. Otherwise, you can't have a BSc from one university of the same course as a BSc from another university, and they wouldn't be equivocal. So there's a lot of overlap. I think some of the things you'd need to look into are the teaching methods. So particularly in medicine, some teach very like lecture-based, hands-on, you're in every day. Others have other teaching methods where they allow you to learn remotely. So they'll give you topics, or they'll give you a case of the week, and they'll ask you to go and look into that case, and it involves you solving the problems yourself. A lot of it's called a problem-based learning. So I think those are the questions you probably have to ask yourself, is how do you learn? And just have a little look on each of the courses websites or online, and just see how they teach their certain courses. Other than that, I think that's very similar. With regarding to choosing a university, I'd have to say it goes a bit with feel. I think going to open days is very important. Make sure you visit the area. I certainly had a feel when I went to some universities that I didn't feel at home. I wasn't sure where, and then I went to others and I was like, this is amazing, I could live here. If you're not living at home, which obviously there's lots of people do choose to go to universities that are local, if you're not living at home, you've got to be settled. It's a big thing doing a degree, and there's very often quite a lot of work that comes with it, some fun too, but also comes along with work. And you've got to feel that you want to be there, because otherwise, you haven't got all the home comforts that you've been used to prior. So you have to look after yourself a little bit. So I think that would be my advice. Make sure you visit the places, and make sure you just do a little bit of what the course is about.
Excellent. Rachel, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with everything Katie said. I guess, my experience is obviously applying to medical school rather than to universities for other degrees. So I think that decision about medical school is a little bit, it's motivated by how long you want the degree to be. So some universities mandate that it is 6 years, whereas some, you can do 5 years instead. So I think that is a sort of motivating factor. And also thinking about how you're taught. Do you want to have a really science-based curriculum and not really see patients for the first couple of years? And that's very much a sort of Oxford, Cambridge, Durham type approach, whereas other universities are more integrated. You can see patients earlier and start to develop those skills a bit earlier on in your career. So places like Birmingham, for example. So I think those things will be really key if you're thinking about applying to medical school, and you have to think about, what would suit me best? What sort of things do I like? And I think the other thing that is really important is, as Katie says, to have a feel of the place that you're going to. 3 years is a long time, 5 years is a long time, 6 years is a long time. You're going to be there for a long time. So it's really important that you like the place that you're going as an actual geographical location. So going there, seeing what the city's like, and talking to the students that are there will help you, I think will be really helpful in helping you decide. And I think that probably is true for, other degrees as well. Understanding if you are happy with the course structure, do you think that the current students there, like what are they saying? Do you like the place that it is? So yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a difficult decision to make in some ways, but it's quite an exciting one.
Okay, thank you. We have had a question from someone who wants to know what sort of salary you get as a medical researcher, or as a surgeon. So, I mean, what would you expect to get when you first start out, and maybe when you're more advanced in your career? Might be quite interesting to know. Katie.
Yeah, so our pay scale is very structured actually as a medic, and doesn't matter what specialty you're in. The BMA has done quite a lot of work to make sure that you have a quite structured pay scale through to being a consultant. And the difference is when you add research into it. That's where I think that's one of the trials and tribulations of research is you can definitely be paid to do research, and most clinicians that do research will apply for grants that make sure that they don't lose out from anything, so that you're equivocal. So the fact that you're doing 2 days a week research and 3 days clinical over 5 days clinical, your wage should be about the same, and you can apply for funding and grants to achieve that. I think out of university it's about 22, 23, am I right? Something around that point. It's if you go onto the online, onto the BMA doctors' pay scales, it lists exactly what it is. And then it fairly quickly goes up. I think the second year is 27, then 33, 34. And then you're looking at around about 45, 50 as a registrar, and something in excess of about 75,000 as a consultant. But all of these things are quite basic, and then you also add your on-calls on top of this as well. So all your on-call and your out-of-hours work, so your weekends and your nights, are a supplement on top of your basic pay. So that's just a ballpark, but as I say, BMA website, you can see exactly what you're going to be paid if you're going to go into that career. And if you're taking clinical sessions out of that to do research, then the funding from that is separate.
Scott, I think if we go with you, I'm just aware that we're running out of time now, so I'm guessing Rachel and Catherine would have similar answers.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not terribly familiar with the pay scales here in the UK, but I can say that, as a career medical researcher, there are different avenues that you can go through. As an academic, you're not going to make as much as potentially in industry. So there's something that you can do. If that is a priority for you, you can go in and you can go look at, working for companies, doing pharmaceuticals, doing device companies, things like that. And so there really is, there's quite a bit of flexibility in, I want to be a scientist. I want to be in medical sciences. What are my priorities? Do I want to be involved in clinical care? Do I want to be involved, with working with students? Do I want to make sure that, my standard of living is a little higher, or if that's not a big priority for me? That can be, you can really look and kind of understand and play around with that just as in your career options. And you don't have to work in a hospital. You don't have to work for a university to be a scientist. You can do that in a lot of different avenues.
Thank you, Scott. Unfortunately, we have got to the end of our time now, so we're not going to have a chance to answer the remaining questions, which are now coming in. But we do have many of these talks. Our next talk is the 3rd of November. So if you're interested in attending those, then do check out the NDORMS webpage. If you search for "Have you thought of a career in medical research?" then you should be able to find us, and that will have the Zoom link for future talks. I'd really like to thank all of the audience for coming and listening. Thank you for your questions. It's been really great to hear from you. I'd love to thank our speakers for coming along and sharing their experience with us here this afternoon. As I say, this talk today has also been part of IF Oxford. So there are lots of events still going on until next Tuesday. For instance, you can meet some of our researchers from NDORMS and NDS. So those are two medical researchers from the Medical Research Departments of the University of Oxford at Templars Square Shopping Centre on Sunday. We're there from 10 till 4. But otherwise, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.